to our first panel here in the lovely panels 2. It's called What in the Indies? I'm Chris Totten. I am the game artist in residence at American University. I'll let you.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Josh McCoy, assistant professor at American University in the Game Lab Computer Science Department, and in the game developer.
So this panel is called What in the Indie? And we are both indie game developers. We're going to be joined soon by Jeremy Pester. He's up getting a laptop so we can have some visual aids. Until then, we're just going to try to weave a tapestry of visual description. Oh, there he is. So, for you to understand some of the games we're going to talk about. My mic is on in theory. Oh, you guys can't hear me?
Now we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so we are here to talk about not just indie games, but weird, wacky, offbeat indie games that we have seen, played, that we have made, and and we want to hear from you guys as well. So we're going to chat up here for a little while, and then we'll open the floor up to some discussions. We're interested to hear what your thoughts are on not just indie games, but also small, funky indie games. So I guess let's get started. So when you hear about, or when you think about like weird indie games, Josh and Jeremy, what do you guys think of? Like, what game pops into your head?
Okay, so the first game that pops into my head is totally a project that is sort of near and dear to my interactive and narrative heart. Pursuit. It's an indie game developed by Emily Short, a prominent interactive fiction author, and Richard Evans, who was the AI lead on The Sims, and they came together to make a really cool game called Pursuit, which lets you play stories, it actually generates text based on how you think the characters interact with one another, and particularly good is their encodings of Jane Austen novels. So super cool stuff. It was super cool enough that Ron Humble picked it up, and they were briefly part of Linden Labs, and now are indie again. So this is sort of like the space that I like to think of with weird indie games, so this AI storytelling space, and things that are very, very textual and narrative.
Yeah. Jeremy, what about you?
Sorry for being late. I was invited to the panel about 10 minutes ago.
Yep.
So I was getting some stuff ready. There are a couple indie games that I think are very interesting, but I want to take sort of the opposite tack of what we just described. One that easily comes to mind is Quap. Who knows that one? Oh yeah, everyone. Okay, so that's.
You actually make the guy run around.
Well, it is possible. I've just never been able to do it. It just takes. And there's another one, Surgeon Simulator, which takes a kind of similar tack. The idea is that a lot of it's kind of silly. In many platforming games, you can make their protagonists do these incredible complex actions with just a couple of button taps. And to take the opposite extreme, where you have to guide literally every single micro-motion of these avatars, is just a kind of very funny way to turn the tables back on the gamer, and for you to sort of think about what is required for you to just go about your daily life.
And so games like that, like Quap, like Surgeon Simulator, they make me think about a condition I've written about called designeritis, where so let's say you're making an indie game, and you are staring at this indie game this close for months, if not years. So you say like, oh, it's finally working. I'm gonna finally go show people, and you're like, here, player, play my game. You're my first player, and they're like, oh man, this is great. And so they turn it on and they die. And there's this element of you've gotten so used to your own game that you don't realize it's hard anymore. So what you think might be level 1 might be level like 17. I've certainly done this in making games. I made a game called Swarm a couple of years ago, and it was a platformer for mobile devices where you tilt, your character would roll around, and you could fight enemies by luring them into traps and collect coins and things like that. But we ran into that where, and I feel like every time we would show something, we'd always push that level, what that we thought was level 1 back. And it's interesting when I see games like Co-op, like Surgeon Simulator, or like anything Terry Kavanaugh makes, because his successful games, because he makes a lot of stuff with a lot of different mechanics. So Terry Kavanaugh is the guy who made Super Hexagon and
V.
So yeah, he made those games, and his thing when he makes the games that are going to garner him a lot of attention are to make games where, like, here's you, and here's the thing you need to get past. So he makes stuff where things fly at you very quickly. And if you like, you're actually going to like a game called Don't Look Back, which is like that game, like DDDDD, but with the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. So, in like DDDDD, you could go back and forth. Once you get Eurydice, you can never turn back around any movement.
You might want to clarify what the Greek myth actually is.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So the Greek myth being that this man loved his wife so much and she died that he went into Hades to recover her soul. So on the way out, he was warned that if you look back at your wife, she'll turn into salt. Is it salt, or am I mixing that up?
That's from, I think that's kind of how it was.
Yeah. So he looks back and she disintegrates, essentially. So you're in this condition where you're in this super hard precision platformer, and you can't look back or else you fail, because then your wife explodes. But yeah, so I find it interesting when you see developers embrace this super hardness, and there's an art to it, because there's an art to the sort of, you start right next to the place where you failed, so have lots of spawn points. But it's sort of unapologetically difficult, but it asks the player to, no, you're here to try and practice with this. We're not going to ease you into this game. I always thought that was kind of fun. And in some of these super small obscurity games.
And just to, I'm going to go on a different path for just a second and advertise my own panel coming up on Sunday, Gaming Ethnography, because it addresses exactly what Chris is talking about. Once you have a game out there, how do you come to understand player experience? How do you come to understand what people are going to get out of the game and what sort of vocabulary the game develops within the player? So if you're curious to know more about that, come check it out, Gaming Ethnography in this room Sunday at 10. I'm done.
Okay, no, that's good. And actually that goes into something that I was thinking about as well, as the idea of gaming vocabulary and games as a conversation, because so often we see actually, by show of hands, who here has heard of some of the games? Who here, I guess I shouldn't say who here has heard of some of the games, because we've said a couple games that are reasonably well known, but who here, when we said some of the games names, we're like, what games are they talking about? Well, I guess that's why we're here. Show of hands. Who here is totally stumped by some of the games we were talking about? Wow, some of you, yeah, wow, you guys dig into some obscure stuff. That's great. So,
Maybe not obscure enough. I mean, we
Yeah,
haven't
right.
tried- we haven't tried very hard.
we haven't tried very hard, okay. Well, I guess the point I'm trying to make with that is that it's interesting to me when you see some of these really obscurity games that are not bad games, because they're the type of games that will look at and be like, wow, this is a pretty good game. Nobody may have ever heard of it, but it is a well-designed, well-made game. And that always kind of strikes me because, in a way, those games are, because there's not always an expectation they might be bought. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't, but they're almost free from the burden of having to be a certain way and make a ton of money.
Well, then how would the developers find the resources to create them in the first place?
Well, and that's the thing, is we don't know those developers' personal situations. I can tell you, as an indie developer, I'm an indie developer with a daytime job. I make games in my free time, but I also, I happen to have a job that works in games, and I'm lucky for that. But, indie is not necessarily one form. You see a lot of indies. Anybody who's seen Indie Game the movie knows there are indie developers who that is their full day job. But I think indie can take a lot of different forms. I mean, that's kind of the point. So it is interesting when you see ones where they're like, it's okay if I make something that is probably not going to find a huge audience,
Yeah, so I kind of want to bounce off that a little bit. Like the range of like indie style games. So you have what we commonly think of as indie, Edmund Millen's Super Meat Boy, and Jonathan Bloor's games, things like that. Things that are super, these guys are full-time indie developers. Then you have smaller developing places that order indie and not indie, and they even like have niches and purposes like education games. See a lot of those is big news these days. We were just at a White House game jam about educational games. So that's out there. And then, so that's sort of like this motto. What they're tailoring to is not particularly the indie game playing crowd. They're like aimed at a very a very high audience of students and whatnot of particular grade levels for particular subjects. And then you have like these games that the people there is no player testing. This is like a very like artistic style video game, very like self-expression style. And we're talking like Twice, Billion Dogs, some interactive fiction works. And those, like if someone came in during the design process and gave feedback and said you should change this here and here, they would almost see that as a breach of authenticity. It wouldn't be the experience that they wanted to portray. Just by, if you look at it, when it's observed, it's destroyed, right? Bring in a little bit of stochastic physics.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost some, if anybody's an art history person here, there's almost some like game Dadaism out there. Because you have, indie is in many ways, a reaction to the very big AAA system, AAA being, your Activisions, your EAs, things like that. So you have these very small games, but a lot of them are still working with the same language of big games. They have the freedom to explore that language a little better. And I mean, a lot of these guys are really good, sharp game designers that know how to create game experiences that are really amazing. But then you have these people who are even beyond that. They're just making stuff that looks like nonsense and craziness, but that's kind of their thing, where you say, if somebody came in and tested it, it would be totally blown away. So when I say game Dadaism, I mean, we're talking about Marcel Duchamp taking a toilet, turning it on its side, and calling it Fountain, and putting it in a museum. That was 100 years ago. That's the Dadaist movement. There was a almost reaction and just insanity for insanity's sake to protest the First World War. There's this aesthetic where it's just insanity. I keep saying that word, but some of these games, again, like I said, Terry Kavanaugh makes some games that are very, mainstream, BBB, Super Hexagon, Don't Look Back. It's kind of in between because it has the mainstream stuff, but it has sort of a procedural story going on a little bit. And then he's got a game like The American Dream, which is a stock trading game. But all the stocks are named after 80s celebrities. So, you start, you're trading, trying to think of some of the people you're trading. I think like you can trade in Ernie Hudson, and then you can like move your way up, and suddenly, like if you're really rich, you can buy and sell stock in Michael Jackson. But then, there's this whole idea, there's this side game of, and as you get money, you can pimp out your apartment a little bit. But then, as you do that, you kind of reach a glass ceiling with that part of the game. You realize it's really pointless. So really, you're just trading stock, and you have all this money for no reason. And it's brilliant. And I never thought that I'd spend an evening playing it. But me and a couple buddies were just like, no, buy more Madonna, buy more Madonna. And, but it was the weirdest game. And, you know, it's interesting to see some of those times when these developers are making these funky things to make some weird statement, you know.
Have any of you played, I think it's 7654321 Continue?
No?
It's the premise that I understand is that you're a video game character who has part of the game that's been turned off, and you're just waiting until the RAM is about to delete your world.
Is that the guy who made Skrill's Quest?
I have no idea.
Is it like pixel art but in 3D?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yes, I have played that game, it's awesome.
You talk about it, or talk about what you don't like about it.
Oh,
Why are you
okay.
bringing this up?
So, well, it's interesting. I really like that designer's work because he takes this very meta approach, even in the more mainstream stuff like Skrill's Quest. He approaches, because I haven't played like a lot of that one, but I haven't. I know exactly which game you're talking about. But it is kind of interesting that, again, you're looking at, well, I guess the coolest thing about that game, and the reason I got excited to download it, and this is another aspect of small, weird designers, is that, and it goes into the art history rant that I was sort of doing, bless you. When you have a designer that has, you have like a bunch of their games, right? If that designer has enough freedom to make their games the way they want, you start to see a style. And that guy has a style. He has the regular Unity shader, and what we affectionately call like the clay shader. He has mostly flat colored objects with sort of a grid pattern on it, so it looks complex, but it's really not. He has the sort of like Sword and Sorcery-esque, if anybody's ever played Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery EP, and if you haven't, totally go check it out, it's fantastic. But these sort of like lanky stick figure-y guys, and they're, he has a very 3D pixel art style. And it's cool when you see that because, again, he can get away with that. So he starts making these games about meta, he makes these like meta narratives about, like Skrill, that one's about a character who was, again, deleted, or like a file who was deleted. So you're playing as this file who's deleted, you're trying to survive.
So it sounds like these are indie games that work to sort of either critique or parody the existing sort of game structure or game narratives. So a couple of games that I can think of that do that as well. Anyone know Half Minute Hero?
Yeah.
Yeah. So talking about that, I haven't even played it, but I know enough about it. It basically just condenses an entire RPG quest into a few 30-second intervals.
Yeah.
And this has been out for a while. So this was probably an indie game before there were such a thing, before they were known as indie games. But Barclay shut up and Jam Gator.
Yeah. Yeah. Buy some locals too. Yeah.
That one actually is a full-fledged RPG, but it takes a post-apocalyptic RPG spin on a sports game.
Yep.
Which was
Yep.
fantastic.
Yep. Yeah, and what else? Yeah, in terms of art styles, you see with Anna Anthropy's work, you look at her work, she has, you know, there's lots of bondage, there's lots of neon colors and sarcastic comments. You know, I love the sound design in Dysphoria, where everything's just like, you know.
And lesbian spider paints for more.
Yeah.
By the way, I haven't read it.
Yay! Yeah. Okay, so any interesting games you guys have?
Papers, please.
Yes.
Please, not papers,
That's
please.
all.
Well, and it's funny too because that goes into one of our wheelhouse areas at AU, which is persuasive games. So again, going back into we went to a game jam last week. We were at a game jam at the White House, and it was an educational game jam, but you know, the idea was that it was a game jam about making games for a purpose. And again, you get into that idea of games as conversation, games game mechanics as verbs and as a communication method, because you know, if you're making something at a certain level and you're trying to make lots of money, you know, this is going to sound so research, I apologize. Where's a PBR when I need it? You know, they have, you know, you're mostly looking to entertain. So again, you're going to take certain affordances to make it just super entertaining. Whereas with these, you know, yeah, you still want to entertain, you want to have people play the game, but the goal is you're going to have to do that by balancing out these mechanics that are going to move you in a way that's going to have some sort of rhetorical element. So a game like September 12th, where you are this crosshair and you have to try to shoot at terrorists. This is from like 10 years ago, 15 years, or not 15 years ago. Yeah, that's a good news game. I guess 12 years ago. But you're a crosshair and you're trying to shoot terrorists in a village, but they're always next to civilians. And if you hit the civilians, other civilians will come to where your bomb exploded, cry over the smoldering pit, and then become terrorists. And it's like the rhetoric of being unwinnable that makes the argument for the game, is the idea that that kind of conflict is unwinnable. And that's how you make games that are persuasive, is you can have this interesting, fun system, but you can also make it say something by either taking away the ability to win or making the player take certain actions and things like that, yeah.
Have you guys ever played any of Jason Warrior's games?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Did you ever play Passage? Or not Passage, Perfection. Perfection, it's a really cool puzzle game. And the entire idea with it is like, on each stage you're getting progressively better. You know, you understand how to work as you're sort of like switching rows and columns and trying to get them into specific locations. But as you get into the later games, the puzzles actually become impossible. But you don't know that until you've worked them all. It's just sort of a situation where you're trying to do perfect and you can't. And so it becomes almost like a message on perfection itself, just with the gameplay. And I always thought that was really awesome because everyone's just like, this shit is impossible. I can't do it perfect. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
You win.
Yeah. Well, oh god. Oh, so there is a game that is in development in the area. So I should also probably mention I'm the head of the local Game Developers Association. So we have like regular meetings, and if anybody's a budding game developer that is not involved in it, we have some of our members here. Please come and see me, because I'm happy to shamelessly plug the organization more. But you know, so we have regular indie dev meetings, and one game that's been circulating around in our meetings is this one called December. And it's interesting you talk about the idea of figuring out that you're not supposed to be playing this game anymore as a game mechanic. So the game, it was one of our global game jam games from last year, and it was it's, you know, just some former students of mine. They made a game about being a 20-something and being kind of like a 20-something that doesn't know quite what they're doing. So you kind of, the way they spin it is, it's a world where everybody's kind of an asshole and everything kind of sucks. So they have this thing where, you know, you get up in the morning and the game, it's an adventure game, it's divided into days, and it would start with like you playing a Game Boy, and you have to make your character stop playing the Game Boy. So it was a really funny mechanic, and they had like some funny little music that went along with it in their Game Jam version. So I see it recently, and they added video games to this sequence. And again, the rule is that the video games are supposed to kind of suck, but they've done something kind of brilliant where they made them like be semi-sucky, but still kind of addictive. So you get caught up in playing this little game. I think one of them, they call it Drundy Man. So you're playing Drundy Man, you're like, oh, come on, I gotta avoid the snakes with swords, you know, and all this other stuff. And then eventually a little word balloon pops up from your roommate, go to work! And again, it's you cannot move this adventure game forward until you stop playing the video game. And it's a really interesting mechanic, you know, when you have that sort of stop playing the video game you're playing to win the video game.
Yeah, this layered experience is really cool.
It reminds me of, this isn't exactly, it was kind Yeah, in the style, the second one, in the style of 8-bit games.
Yeah, the second one's version of that was incredible. Yeah. Has anybody not played that game? Okay, so No More Heroes is a series where you are, actually, that's a perfect example of game designer as artist too. It's a Suda51 game. So if anybody knows Suda51's work, you can see it from a mile away.
Killer 7.
Yeah, I love Killer 7. I wish they'd revive that. So anyway, in No More Heroes, you're a wannabe assassin with a lightsaber, but you need a rechargeable lightsaber. But you have to make money to be entered into assassination quests. So you have to go do odd jobs, and then when you get enough money, then you can like go fight other assassins, and then you get these like awesome brawler levels with these insane bosses. But in order to do it, you have to like then go mow people's lawns and pull coconuts.
I mean, and those games are kind of fun, but they're not. I mean, the fights are the main meat of the game, and those other games sort of serve as like an inconvenient distraction, kind of like work itself.
Yeah, but then what they did in the second one, because the first one very much feels like that. Everything that you're doing that's not those missions is kind of a pain in the butt. They streamlined the entire thing in the second one, so then you have these weird, fun, 8-bit, like, you know, little mini arcade games. And it's that sort of layered experience where you're looking forward to the fight, but you're also looking forward to going to work. It's the weirdest game ever. So I guess we can switch gears into some of, we've talked about weird games that we've played. Are there any, I guess, what's your, Josh, you and I should probably talk about game jamming and sort of the experience of randomness of making weird games. For those of you who aren't familiar, game jamming is an event where you get together with people and you make a game in a very limited amount of time, usually 24 to 48 hours. MAGFest Prime this year will be next year. Well, yeah,
right.
this,
So that
you know what I'm talking about. In a few months, will be a site for the 2015 Global Game Jam, which Tim is kindly helping us with. But yeah, so you know, you make these games in 48 hours. If you're going to go full tilt on the game jam, you usually say everything. You can't have a team before this. You can't have assets before this. You know, you can't have anything pre-prepared. So like, what are some of your like experiences with some of those?
Oh, so my strategies have been really, really nice. So instead of, so I do a lot of government, I try to pitch the research I want to do to government entities so they'll pay for it, right? So that puts me on a very narrow track. Games that will, do well in the mass market put you on a very narrow track. Game jams free you from that. Game jams allow you to express your game design, your creativity, your ideas in a way that's not constrained. It's throwaway. It's a weekend of fun and free food. So it is this like nice way to get together, to meet new people, to work in small collaborative teams, to work intensely on one idea that may not even have legs past the end of the weekend, but who cares? And it's also a way to sort of like hit a design challenge. These jams typically have design constraints that you have to obey if you want to get in their competitions and win whatever prizes that game jams typically have. And you can ignore those, but they give you a creative constraint to sort of, instead of like blue sky, oh, what do I want to do? All things are possible. Okay, make a game about life and death, and for bonus points, involve the color screening. It's it's that sort of constraint that you get some really interesting artifacts from.
Yeah, we actually Surgeon Simulator was a global game jam game that became a retail product from the Global Game Jam 2 years ago, when the subject was the sound of a heartbeat. Some games interpreted the heartbeat thing so literally they had Genova Chen from that game company, maker of like Flower and Journey, in one of the keynotes they were like, don't take the theme too literally, everybody. Because there were so many games that were just like, you know, pump the heart.
Five-finger heart that one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we were, last year's Game Jam theme was, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So one game that came out of the site I was working at was a 2-player split-screen first-person deathmatch game. Except that the split screens were placed over each other, and it was called False Sense of Self. And you had to try to, like, you know, do the normal deathmatch thing, but you had to figure out which screen you actually were in this like overlaid game. It was and it's one of those things where you hear it pitched and you're like, that's going to be the best thing ever for the Game Jam theme. Like that could very well win it if they pull it off, but it will be the worst game. It will be no fun at all. And I was completely wrong. It was the best. It was so much fun. But yeah, it was the weirdest thing, and that's what I think those sort of small environments are really good for, is this idea of making weird things. You have to think outside the box. You know, we came up with this past weekend a side-scrolling shoot 'em up that it was a math game, and your laser was the shape of a mathematical function, like a graphic function. So
quadratic equations.
yeah, so like you had, yeah, exactly. Actually, the sine waves were the most fun to design levels for. So yeah, you had this laser, and you had to transform mathematical functions, and then that would turn into the shape of your laser. So you would have to use like quadratic equations to like fish for things. And then the sine wave, we'd have like the boss, and then there'd be these like zigzaggy walls, and you'd have to find the right frequency and amplitude of the sine wave to destroy the boss. So yeah, we've done some stuff like that. We've done weird like horror games out of some of these things. I made one a couple years ago called Susie's Summer Home. It was just this like, every room had a different puzzle, and you had to figure out A, what the puzzle was, and B, like what the criteria by which the correct answer would be judged, and then otherwise you die in weird and hilarious ways. Yeah.
So, a big trend now I'm seeing in game jams is the use of non-digital games. I know we're here at the MAGFest 8.5, and video game music is all the rage, but independent games go way past digital games too. Board games are totally up there. I mean, Dominion. You guys played Dominion? It's a great board game, deck builder. I mean, it's so much fun. And not, this was indie. I mean, a lot of these board games are small developers having cool ideas that they're until something cool comes out.
Joust.
Yeah, yeah.
Just.
Well, and these guys are like coming up with really weird ideas of what it means to be a game in some ways. I like Dominion a lot because it's the deck building thing, except you don't have to go and be like, I got my trading card pack, I didn't get Charizard. I love that it alleviates that by being like, here's a box, and your box has these cards in it, and your game, you just have to build a deck out of this like box of cards we've given you. So you bought them all already. You can buy expansions and things, but like they're all self-contained. You don't have to guess. You know in the expansion what you're going to get. And I think that's really refreshing because that makes me actually want to spend money on stuff like this, as evidenced by my X-Men miniatures happened over the summer, where they did the same thing, where it's like, I know the A-Wing has this card in it, and I'm going to buy 5. I didn't buy 5, don't worry. Yeah, right? But yeah, it's very interesting, and then you see games that really do some weird things. So I was on a panel a couple days ago for games and architectural design, and we so there's this movement, again talking about non-digital games. There's a movement of people who are doing art installation games. So you go to a place and you see this cool sculpture, and then you realize that you can play it. So there was one recent, within the last few years in DC, where you would like go up to it, you can like touch it, and the point of the game was if you touched the surface of it, then it would light up, and then you had to try to work in a team of people to try to light up the whole surface. The game designer Eric Zimmerman does a lot of these types of games with an architect named Natalie Mosey, and I totally encourage you guys to go check out the YouTube video of them talking about their work at NYU. It's really interesting.
The work was amazing too, just
Yeah.
visually
It's
appealing.
gorgeous. But those transform the idea of play in games, because you can play it as I'm going to walk around it, or you can play it as in I'm going to participate in it. And I think that has a lot of legs to it, because it can make more playful worlds and environments, like in the real world. Same thing with games that incorporate, a mobile phone of some type.
Augmented reality games.
Augmented reality games, Ingress. If anybody plays Google Ingress, it's that sort of MMORPG, ARG, augmented reality game. It's all the things. It is all the things, and it's like, so anybody who doesn't know, basically you have this app on your phone and you go in, and it'll show you where there are portals, and you have to go hunt down them. There's a couple.
Enlightened or resistance?
Huh?
Enlightened or resistance?
Oh yeah. So,
That's a question.
wait, what?
That's a question.
Oh, I thought you were saying a statement.
Oh,
Which fraction?
oh, which faction?
Yeah.
Oh, so, confession, I haven't. I've not gotten that deep into it. So like, I've played around with it, but I don't have actual time to go. I feel bad. I want to. Yeah. Well, what did I used to play? I used to play Shadow Cities that was like this. And then but I've been like paying attention to how people's been doing it. But yeah, Shadow Cities is like a lot of the same thing. I can't even remember what faction it was at this point. But the idea is you'd like go to a place and you'd find this portal, and then that would, get points for your team. But you'd have to physically, like if there was a portal here, you could check it in. And it's this idea where you're gonna go and just kind of wander around the community, but then it becomes this game experience because your mobile device is added this like game layer to it. Yeah.
The important thing to take away from that is that there's a certain limit to your ability to use the game that you can just do with the phone. At a certain point, you have to engage your local community in order to do anything that will put any movements, which forces you to log into the other Google products such as Hangouts or go to social networks and things like that. So there's kind of and it's all community focused, which I think is neat because it fosters that community.
Well, it's the same thing with like the Nintendo Street Pass stuff. There's those Street Pass communities that people would go and, there's the idea where you can either sort of participate in it passively, or you could, there are Street Pass communities where they'll be like, we're going to meet at this time at this place. Yeah, bring your DS, and people approach it, and it's really cool to see how play is reinventing itself because of these weird games.
Well, that's really cool to be so focused on one little object. You usually innate yourself in one set of so.
Exactly, yeah, and I like those public-private mechanics.
But that's not in you.
No, that's not indeed. So we're going to reel it back into the But hey, Shovel Knight had cool Street Pass implementation. So good. You had a question? No. Any questions?
What if we're like 45 minutes into our hour panel?
Yeah, so let's hear your guys' experience with like weird games. Games you want to let people know about?
I will.
Sure.
Who here knows Amanita Design?
Oh yeah.
There's a new game, I just had this for a while, but I started playing it the other day, Botaniculum.
Oh yeah.
It really sort of is a very streamlined and simplified adventure game. So you don't even necessarily play the game for its puzzling challenges, which is not too hard. You play it for the really strange and wacky aesthetic.
Machinarium.
Yeah, so all their games are pretty much like that. You know, they're not terribly challenging as games, but they're just so engrossing as worlds and the things and the creatures that inhabit it that you just feel like playing it anyway.
Well, and that's something that I really appreciate as a game artist, because when you think of game art, and when people want to get into game development through the art path, they're always like, well, I need to get really good at Photoshop, and I need to get really good at digital painting. Or they'll get really good at pixel art. Or they'll get, oh, I need to become a really good 3D artist. And that's all stuff games are made that way. But I feel like we've hit this rut where that's become game art. And it's like, but we can display all kinds of stuff. So grade everything by them, like, Botanicula and Machinarium. Yeah, like, Machinarium was like cool pen drawings and watercolors. Or it looked like it, Aquarius, gorgeous graphic-wise. Botanicula, it almost looks like they just took, like, I found a leaf, scanned leaf. I did a game one time where I took craft foam and cut out the craft foam and then, like, arranged it in Photoshop and, tried to maintain the fidelity of, like, this looks like it was once a real object. But we put it together in Unity, and it had a really interesting aesthetic, and I really wish that more game companies... who here has played, it was in IGF this past year, Dominic Pamplemousse.
Oh, Dom Pom.
Yeah, Dom Pom. Okay, so Dominic Pamplemousse is an adventure game made in clay, like Squinky, the designer here is Squinky Kai. So Squinky, she made these claymation figures, photographed them, and that was their frames of animation. Yeah. So,
the music should be noted for Dom Pom too.
well, that's the other thing. So it's an adventure game, an adventure detective game in claymation that is a musical. So any clues are going to be sung. It's fantastic.
She did all the singing. She did all the euphonium playing.
Yeah. So about gender identity issues. That's the other thing. It's about gender identity issues, and it's fantastic. And everybody should play it. But it is. I saw it, and I'm like, this is brilliant. She made it this really, you look at that game, you're like, that is only that game. It's and great for it. So to make the walls of the main character's office, which is supposed to be kind of run down, she took cardboard and then took the surface off part of the cardboard to look like the drywall was falling off, but so that you'd see the corrugations in the cardboard. It was amazing. And that's another thing that I think that sort of small indie thing can do, is be that kind of experimental where it's well, why can't I make my game look like the Very Hungry Caterpillar? And I'm serious, I want to make a game that looks like the Very Hungry Caterpillar, because Eric Carl's illustration style, what he would do is he would paint a piece of paper and then cut out that paper and then make a collage out of it. So that's where you have you see the paintbrush strokes, but on this cutout stuff. So it's really visually interesting. I can tell you from experience, that kind of art is way faster to do than some of the typical game art methods, because you're just kind of making it out of very simple things and then compositing.
So on this panel, we've talked a lot about sort of different qualities that indies have, and sort of ways that indie games might be distinct from AAA games. And it's clear that you guys are pretty knowledgeable in the indie scene yourself. I think that's why you're here. So let me ask you guys, what qualities about indie games appeal to you? Why is it that what drew you to this panel? What drew you to indie games in general?
Policy. I like the mechanic that you're getting. Okay.
I like the fact that indie games, I think we've been talking about, is that they can take risks that AAA games can't.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of narrative-based games. I like a good story, so I'm a big fan of adventure games, visual novels, things like that. Where those kind of games got a lot of flack from so-called hardcore gamers who only play AAA games. So when something like Gone Home comes out, and it's purely based on this experience of the story for interaction, those are the kind of games that I really enjoy. Those are the things I really like seeing in games.
And I think that's a really good point too, is story through interaction. Gone Home does it really well. If you've ever played Dysphoria, that's another go-to example of that, where the author uses the mechanics to talk about like a very personal life experience. So yeah, I mean, again, that the studies of how do we do this better in games, I think, is a big part of game design, or in game design.
One of the things I love about indie games is I love the mechanic of you win by not winning, or just like making you stop halfway through, or like by the time you get to the end, you're like, I actually don't want to win this. And it's so rare to see in any AAA games. Like the only one I can think of is it kind of does in Shadow of the Colossus, because by the end of the game, you're like, I hate killing these things. I don't know why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But I love when a game can pull that off, because it's just like, I really feel more so attached to the game that I'm morally opposed to getting to the end. Like,
So, I played Train on forever.
Oh.
Train, yeah.
So Train, for those of you who don't know, is a board game by Brenda Romero. Her main name is Brenda Brathwaite. She is a famous game developer who worked in AAA for years, worked on the Wizardry series. Married John Romero, so now they're like game development super couple. And she makes just awesome stuff and is an awesome person. But she has this game called Train, where the mechanic is you're trying to, and I've seen it, you've like sat down with it, so help me along here.
I'm uncomfortable with it.
Yes, exactly. So you are trying to put these little yellow pieces, into a train and move the train along. And then,
Efficiently deliver the yellow pieces to their destination.
yes.
Yeah.
At some point in the game, you realize, oh hey, I'm a Nazi. And the end is a concentration camp.
What? Yeah, and you realize that with a game board that's broken glass, like Persona, right? And
Yeah.
little toy trains.
Yeah.
It's
And then there's like, there's a typewriter with like SS logos on the keys over to the side. Yeah. It's incredible. It's not something that you like, oh man, it's train night, you know. You're not gonna do that. You never want to do that. But, you know, again, I mean, that's a game that has a different definition of fun entirely. Like, it's not fun in that was awesome. It's fun in I made this interesting discovery and now I feel kind of uncomfortable, but
I would recommend checking out her entire series of Mechanic System Message.
yeah,
She's doing an entire like arcade series in the main train just for physical games.
yeah.
All worth looking at.
Yeah, and well, and actually another designer that does that sort of switch on you, the bait and switch type of thing. Our boss, Lindsay Graves, he actually does these a lot. And excuse me, he has a game called Wait, where it's this like pretty 3D world, and you kind of like want to explore it because you're in a very basic area. So you're like, I'm going to go and run and do quests and things. But the mechanic is actually that you're just supposed to like sit there. And as you sit there, the world starts to flourish and become more populated with interesting things. So he has that kind of bait and switch like aesthetic too, where he does it in a lot of his work, where he suddenly, really, anytime he talks about that stuff, I always go, what's a twist? So any other questions? Yeah.
I just wanted to make a comment that the reason why I like indie games is simply because there isn't you self-declare yourself as indie, and there isn't this desire to sort of meet any one particular person's expectations or expectations of the publisher necessarily. So you can sort of do what you wanted to do, not what you're getting paid to do, which is the designer is free, and you can sort of feel it in the game as a whole, as a whole product. And the other thing that's interesting is that any game developers typically have, if they're that kind of developer, will sort of have an open-ended idea that can create game frameworks, not just games, and those have a lot of potential.
So there's, I think a point that was brought up, and I want to acknowledge it really quickly too, and it kind of goes along with this, like, what does it mean to be indie, and what do they have that other people don't, kind of thing. talk about indie, and I think, Jeremy, you said it at one point when you said, oh, this game is from before we even really called it indie. Where I went to a panel one time that was on indie game studies, and I was like, I don't know what to expect of this. I know it's going to be indie games and studying something, but is it going to be studying to make indie games, or are we going to like research indie games? And it was the latter, but it was this cool idea of like, what's the history of indie games? And one of the things they debated over was, how do we identify the indies? And when do we start identifying the indies? And it was cool to me because people would talk about like, so British games in the 80s. If anybody's ever heard of a computer called the ZX Spectrum. Okay, so that was, for all intents and purposes, a movement, very much a design environment where you could consider it by today's standards indie, but it wasn't really, and same thing with like PCs in the 80s, but the thing that people always pull out is like they weren't really contrasting anything that was big the way they are now. So you get that idea of, can we even call that indie? Or is that just kind of how it was, and we're learning from that spirit?
Yeah.
One thing that interests me, I mean, these aren't normally, I don't think you could normally consider these indie games, but I think they fit a lot of the same expectations that we just talked about here. And that's when people can remix or design their own games for well-known commercial games.
Yeah.
So round modding, for example, there's a very big Sonic modding community.
Yeah.
So everyone knows Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, they couldn't be considered indie by any stretch. But when you take the ROMs and you start to do things to them, and one of my favorites is Sonic becomes fatter after every ring.
Yeah, I was about to say Fat Sonic, yeah.
So again, I don't think that you could call it an indie game per se, but in terms of playing with expectations, not really, having commercial viability, et cetera, it fits a lot of those same criteria. Phoenix Wright, it looks like an indie game, but for the fact that it's very successful and published by Capcom. And I've actually been able to play a few fan cases because Phoenix Wright is technically a very simple game. Just a few fan engines have been created that can create their own cases with startling accuracy in terms of what it looks, in terms of resemblance to the original games. And then people create their own stories and their own characters and everything. And sometimes the way that you play through those are a bit different than normal.
There's a game called Knit Stories that is kind of like that. It's not, a famous, it is itself has a big audience, but it's not like there's Mario in it or something like that. But it's the same kind of thing where you have this game and it has some cool things, but there's also an editor in it, and people create richer content than with some.
That's a whole other thing. Like games that come with built-in editors for the purpose.
Yeah.
Those StarCraft 2, easy example. What?
Morrowind.
Oh, Morrowind, yes.
Yeah. Minecraft.
Did you play Ghosted?
Those two, yeah.
They leave
Oh,
the
man,
agents.
my wrist.
Yeah. Well, there's an Australian guy making a clone of it for PC and Android.
See, I've seen
Yeah,
that.
and
Yeah.
that's all. There's nothing that comes with it. You have to get things. So they don't make it. They're pretty sucks.
Yeah, and DDRs have a version like that. So sort of not rip-offs, but clones of existing well-known commercial games that people can create their own content for. That and they may do it differently. They may come up with new ideas and ridiculously challenging levels or something like that. Just new ways of conceptualizing existing ideas.
So we're at the end here. So I guess recommendations for these guys if they want to go experience some of what we've talked about or get into some of this stuff. Starting, Jeremy, go.
Playing VV is pretty much a requirement.
Yeah.
You can beat it in maybe a day or two. It's not very long. I'm still a little bit myself, but the NonDigital game that I mentioned before is very cool. And
I'll stick true to the form. Versu, check it out on the iPad. It's amazing. Check out the Twine stuff. Howling Dogs. Yeah, really good. Christina loves work.
Yeah,
Anything by any vigilante,
yeah.
awesome. And
Read her book.
yeah, looks really good.
Yeah. Her book starts out kind of like screw you and screw him and screw they and screw anybody that's not me. But then once you get through like the first 20 pages of that, you know, I will say this: if you're a guy, you feel like, oh, I have a problem. But then after that, you're like, yeah, let's make games, and let's make games with those like emulator like. The ROM hacks and things like that. But yeah, read her book. It's really cool. I like her work and her writing because she talks about games a lot that she makes. And then you realize, wait, this game lasts for 3 minutes. That's so cool because when you make a video game, that takes a lot of the pressure off of like, I have to make Final Fantasy. You know, you don't have to make a 50-hour quest. You can make something small. I would read that book. I would check out, if you really want to see some what-the indie games, even though they weren't indie at the time, but games along that line, check out the ZX Spectrum and go find some like, you know, recreations of those games, because, dude, they're weird. And then, I guess, like, go check out game engines that let you, like, Twine is great.
So easy to get into, too.
So easy to get into. Construct 2, he's tired of hearing me talk about it, but it's Game Maker, like those really simple, you don't have to be John Carmack to understand game engines, they're great. RPG Maker. Oh, and then play, if you're ever worried about your art skills, play a game called Sissy's Magical Pony Corn Adventure. It was drawn by a 5-year-old with crayons. Done. Yeah, and she has a published game, damn it. So, anybody can do it.
Well, let's begin GBC too. So.
Yeah, hey, her and her dad had a TED Talk.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, so,
Well, the dad was probably famous designer, right?
no. Well, he's famous now. Yeah. All right, so, thanks guys.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.